Adaugo and Chiamaka had been best friends for years, but their lives had taken very different paths. Chiamaka, the high-class girl, always had everything she wanted. She was rich, fashionable, and had a group of wealthy men who supported her extravagant lifestyle. Chiamaka often laughed at Adaugo, telling her that she needed to stop acting like she was too holy and join the lifestyle. "You're keeping yourself for a man who's out there sleeping with other girls," she would say, as she applied her makeup, getting ready for a night out at the club with her latest sponsor. Despite Chiamaka's wealth and carefree attitude, her background was not as glamorous. Her parents had struggled financially, but Chiamaka had promised herself that she would be the one to bring light to her family. She wanted to escape the life of poverty she grew up in, and that drive pushed her into relationships with men who could provide her with the life she desired. As Chiamaka was getting ready to leave the house for another night out, Adaugo sat quietly, watching her. Adaugo's stomach was empty, and she had no food at home. She gathered the courage to ask her best friend for help. "Please, can you give me 1,000 naira? There's no food at home," she asked softly, hoping for some mercy. Chiamaka stopped what she was doing, giving Adaugo a look that was full of disgust. She rolled her eyes and responded sharply, "I should give you money? You can't sleep with men for money, but you want to use money that came from fornication?" She hissed in frustration and tossed the money at Adaugo's face, making her feel small and unworthy. Adaugo stood there, feeling embarrassed and hurt by her friend's words. She didn't have the same lifestyle as Chiamaka, but she still had dreams of a better future. She didn't understand how Chiamaka could be so harsh. Still, she took the money, knowing she had no other choice. Deep down, Adaugo hoped that someday she could escape this cycle and find a way to live a life full of dignity. But for now, she had to endure the pain. That night, the weather was cold and the sky was overcast, signaling that rain was about to fall. Adaugo had gone to sleep early, trying to forget the uncomfortable exchange she'd had with Chiamaka earlier. She lay on her bed, wrapped in a thin blanket, wishing for better days. The wind howled outside as the rain began to pour, adding to the sense of isolation she felt. Then, she was suddenly woken by loud, rapid knocks on the door. Groggy and confused, Adaugo struggled to get out of bed. She rubbed her eyes and stumbled toward the door. When she opened it, she was shocked to find Chiamaka standing there, accompanied by a man she didn't recognize. The man seemed confident, dressed in a well-tailored suit, but there was a coldness in his eyes that made Adaugo uneasy. She didn't ask any questions. She simply nodded and stepped aside to let them in, although she was unsure of what was going on. Her heart raced as the door closed behind them, and she silently retreated back to her bed, trying to mind her own business. But moments later, Chiamaka's voice called out from the other side of the room. "Adaugo," she said sharply, "you need to leave the room." Adaugo sat up, confused. "What?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Chiamaka was firm, her tone colder than usual. "It's just one room. The man and I need some privacy. You can't stay in here while we—" Chiamaka hesitated but didn't need to finish her sentence. It was clear what she meant. Adaugo felt her heart sink. She had no place to go. The tiny apartment was all she had, and it wasn't like there was a spare room she could escape to. She pleaded, "Please, Chiamaka, I have nowhere else to go. It's so late, and the rain outside." But Chiamaka's eyes were hard, and her words were even harder. "I don't care. This is my space. You can't stay in here." Adaugo didn't want to argue with her best friend. She had already asked for too much and didn't want to cause more trouble. She grabbed her blanket and left the room, slowly walking out into the cold, dimly lit corridor. The sound of the rain pounding against the windows made her feel even more alone, but she tried to stay calm. She curled up on the floor in the narrow corridor, wrapping the thin blanket around herself for warmth. As she lay there, the reality of her situation weighed heavily on her. She had no money, no home, and now, not even the comfort of her own room. The sound of Chiamaka's laughter and the muffled voices of the man made her heart ache, but she forced herself to close her eyes, trying to block it all out. Sleep didn't come easily that night. In the dark corridor, with the cold rain outside, Adaugo quietly wished for things to change. But for now, she had to endure the silence, the loneliness, and the painful reality of being left in the shadows. Uche, Chiamaka's boyfriend, had always done everything for her. He was a kind-hearted man, a humble Kiki tricycle driver who worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Despite his efforts, Chiamaka had never truly valued him. She was always focused on her high standards, seeking a life of luxury, and Uche just couldn't keep up with her desires. Eventually, Chiamaka ended things with him, telling him that he wasn't able to provide her with the kind of life she wanted. He was heartbroken, but he respected her decision, though it left him feeling like he wasn't good enough. That night, after the argument between Adaugo and Chiamaka, Uche had come back, his heart still heavy with longing for Chiamaka. He couldn't let her go without trying one last time to convince her to give him another chance. He had dropped by, hoping to speak to her, but when he reached the door, he was met with an unexpected sight. There, in the dark corridor, he saw Adaugo curled up on the cold floor, wrapped in a thin blanket. His first instinct was to keep quiet and walk past, not wanting to intrude on whatever was happening between Chiamaka and the man she had brought home. But as he looked at Adaugo, sleeping alone in such a vulnerable position, he felt a deep sense of pity for her. Adaugo had always been kind to him, but he never realized just how much she was suffering. His heart softened as he stood there, staring at her. He couldn't ignore the situation, not anymore. He took a deep breath and gently called out, "Adaugo, are you okay?" Adaugo stirred slightly but didn't immediately respond. She didn't want to speak, not knowing if it was really Uche standing there. But when she saw him clearly, she sat up quickly, her eyes wide. She wasn't expecting to see him, not after everything that had happened. She hadn't thought about him much after the breakup with Chiamaka, but there he was, standing in front of her. Uche's voice was soft, almost hesitant. "What are you doing out here? Why are you sleeping in the corridor?" Adaugo didn't want to get into it. She had already been through enough that night, but she couldn't help herself. "Chiamaka asked me to leave the room. She has someone over," she said quietly, trying to downplay the pain she felt. Uche looked at her, a deep sadness in his eyes. He could see that Adaugo was struggling, just like he had been. He didn't want to leave her out here alone. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice full of concern. "Come with me. I have a place nearby. You can stay there until things settle down." Adaugo hesitated. She didn't want to burden Uche, especially with everything that had been happening with Chiamaka. She was afraid of causing more trouble, but something in Uche's eyes told her that he genuinely cared. "I don't want to upset her. She'll be angry if I leave," Adaugo replied softly, unsure of what to do. Uche shook his head, understanding her worry. "It's okay, Adaugo. We're not together anymore, remember. She won't mind. It's not like you're doing anything wrong." Adaugo looked down at the floor, feeling torn. She didn't want to make things more complicated, but at the same time, she couldn't stay in the cold corridor either. Her pride told her to refuse, but her heart told her she needed help. "Please," Uche added gently, "just come with me. You'll be safe, and I don't want you sleeping here like this." Adaugo looked into his eyes and saw nothing but kindness. She had no other choice. "Okay," she whispered, standing up slowly. "But I don't want to cause any more problems." Uche smiled softly and led her away from the cold corridor. As they walked to his apartment, Adaugo couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. Adaugo stayed at Uche's place, grateful for his kindness, but determined not to overstep. She helped with house chores, cooked meals, and kept the place tidy as a way to show her appreciation. Uche, in turn, was touched by her humility and hard work. Over time, he began to see Adaugo in a new light. Her quiet strength, her resilience, and her gentle nature drew him in. He found himself falling for her, though he tried to hide his feelings, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. Adaugo, however, noticed the way Uche looked at her and the extra care he took to make her feel at home. She felt torn. She didn't want to betray Chiamaka, even though their friendship had become strained. One day, she decided to confront Chiamaka and tell her everything. She met her at a cafe, nervously explaining how Uche had taken her in and how their relationship had evolved. Chiamaka listened, her expression unreadable. Then, she burst into laughter. "I knew it!" she exclaimed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I knew you were all over him. I knew you liked him. Well, I don't do broke boys anyway. You can have him. Let him get you pregnant and see how you'll suffer." Her words were harsh, but Adaugo wasn't surprised. Chiamaka had always been dismissive of Uche, and now she seemed almost relieved to pass him off to Adaugo. With Chiamaka's permission, though it felt more like a dismissal, Adaugo moved in fully with Uche. Uche was overjoyed, though he tried to remain respectful and not overwhelm her. He loved and cared for her deeply, and Adaugo began to feel safe and valued in a way she hadn't in a long time. Their bond grew stronger, and Uche's life began to change for the better. One day, Uche got a job through a referral, a small contract that he executed flawlessly. Impressed by his dedication and skill, the client recommended him for a bigger project. This was the breakthrough Uche had been waiting for. He worked tirelessly, and soon his fortunes began to turn. The bigger contract brought in more money, and Uche's reputation grew. It was as if Adaugo's presence had brought light and luck into his life. Uche didn't forget Adaugo's role in his transformation. He showered her with gifts, took her out, and made sure she never lacked anything. But more than the material things, he showed her love, respect, and appreciation. Adaugo, who had once felt like she was living in the shadows, now felt seen and cherished. Their relationship blossomed, and Adaugo's life took a turn for the better. She no longer had to endure the cold corridors or the harsh words of her former best friend. Instead, she found herself in a warm, loving home with a man who truly valued her. Chiamaka's curiosity turned to shock when she noticed Adaugo's Instagram profile. Adaugo, who had once struggled to make ends meet, was now posting pictures from fancy restaurants, wearing stylish clothes, and even traveling to beautiful places. The most surprising part was seeing Uche in those photos, looking happier and more successful than she had ever seen him. Chiamaka couldn't believe her eyes. She thought it must be some kind of editing or a facade, but the more she scrolled, the more real it seemed. Unable to contain her curiosity and growing unease, Chiamaka decided to call Adaugo. When Adaugo answered, Chiamaka's tone was a mix of disbelief and thinly veiled jealousy. "Adaugo, what's going on? Are those pictures real? How did you and Uche end up like this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Adaugo, calm and composed, confirmed everything. "Yes, Chiamaka, it's real. Uche got a big contract, and things have been going well for him. He's been very kind to me, and we've been building a life together." Her words were simple, but they hit Chiamaka like a ton of bricks. Chiamaka's shock quickly turned to anger. She couldn't believe that Uche, the man she had dismissed as broke and not good enough, was now thriving, and with Adaugo, of all people. She felt a pang of regret and jealousy. How could this happen, she thought. I suffered with him when he had nothing, and now Adaugo gets to enjoy the fruits of his success? Determined not to let Adaugo rip her harvest, as she saw it, Chiamaka began plotting ways to win Uche back. She convinced herself that she deserved to be the one enjoying the luxurious life Uche could now provide. After all, she had been with him during his struggles, and in her mind, that gave her some claim to his success. Chiamaka started sending messages to Uche, apologizing for how things had ended between them. "Uche, I made a mistake," she wrote. "I was young and foolish, and I didn't appreciate you. But I've changed now. I miss you, and I want us to try again." She poured her heart into her messages, hoping to rekindle the connection they once had. But Uche didn't reply. He had moved on, and his heart now belonged to Adaugo. He had seen Chiamaka's true colors when she left him for not being able to meet her materialistic demands. He had also witnessed how she treated Adaugo, and it had only strengthened his resolve to build a life with someone who valued him for who he was, not what he could provide. Chiamaka's frustration grew as her messages went unanswered. She couldn't accept that Uche had chosen Adaugo over her. In her mind, Adaugo didn't deserve the life she was now living. Chiamaka's pride and jealousy blinded her, and she began to spiral, concocting more desperate plans to get Uche back. Chiamaka, desperate and unwilling to let go of the life she felt entitled to, decided to take matters into her own hands. She invited Adaugo to her apartment under the guise of wanting to talk things out and reconnect as friends. Adaugo, still holding on to the remnants of their once close friendship, agreed to meet, hoping to find some resolution. When Adaugo arrived, Chiamaka greeted her with a forced smile and ushered her inside. The apartment was as lavish as ever, but there was a tension in the air that made Adaugo uneasy. They sat down, and after some small talk, Chiamaka cut straight to the point. "Adaugo, you need to leave Uche," Chiamaka said, her tone firm but laced with a false sense of concern. "If you truly love and value our friendship, you'll let him go. He and I have history, and I deserve to be with him now that he's doing well. You know how much I've done for you in the past, back in university. When you had nothing, I was there for you. Remember all those times I helped you? This is your chance to repay me." Adaugo sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. Chiamaka's words were a mix of manipulation and guilt-tripping, and they hit Adaugo hard. She did remember all the times Chiamaka had helped her in the past, and she had always been grateful for that. But this felt different. This felt wrong. "Chiamaka, I don't know what to say," Adaugo finally replied, her voice trembling. "I love Uche. I really do. He's been so good to me, and we've built something real together. Please, try to understand me. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't just walk away from him." Chiamaka's expression hardened. "Adaugo, this isn't about love. This is about loyalty. You owe me this. If you don't leave him, you're betraying our friendship. Do you really want to throw away everything we've been through for a man? Think about it. Uche and I were together first. I suffered with him when he had nothing. Now that he's successful, you think you can just swoop in and take what's rightfully mine?" Adaugo felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't want to lose Chiamaka's friendship, but she also couldn't imagine leaving Uche. He had become her rock, her safe place, and the thought of walking away from him broke her heart. Yet, Chiamaka's words weighed heavily on her, stirring up feelings of guilt and obligation. I need time to think," Adaugo said softly, her eyes downcast. "This is all too much. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I don't know what to do." Chiamaka leaned in closer, her voice softening but still carrying an edge. "Adaugo, you know what the right thing to do is. Let Uche go. For the sake of our friendship, for the sake of peace. If you don't, you'll regret it. You'll lose me forever." Adaugo left Chiamaka's apartment that day feeling more confused and conflicted than ever. She loved Uche deeply, but Chiamaka's words had planted seeds of doubt in her mind. Sent Chiamaka a message. It was short but firm. "Chiamaka, I value our friendship, but I can't leave Uche. He's the man I love, and I won't let anyone come between us. I hope one day you can understand and respect my decision." The room was dimly lit, the glow of Chiamaka's phone screen casting eerie shadows across her face as she scrolled through Adaugo's Instagram profile. Each picture felt like a dagger to her heart. Adaugo and Uche smiling at fancy restaurants, traveling to exotic locations, and living the life she had always dreamed of. Her jaw tightened, and her fingers gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "How dare they?" she whispered to herself, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and bitterness. "How dare they flaunt this in my face?" She zoomed in on a particular photo of Uche and Adaugo at a beach resort, their laughter frozen in time. Uche's arm was wrapped around Adaugo's shoulders, his eyes filled with a warmth Chiamaka had never seen when they were together. Adaugo, once the quiet, struggling girl she had looked down on, now radiated confidence and happiness. It was unbearable. Chiamaka's mind raced as she stared at the screen. "This isn't how it's supposed to be," she muttered, her voice growing colder. "I was the one who suffered with him. I was the one who deserved this life, not her. Never her." She closed the app and tossed her phone onto the bed, but the images lingered in her mind, fueling her rage. She stood up and began pacing the room, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. "If they think they can just erase me and live happily ever after, they're wrong," she said aloud, her voice low and venomous. "Dead wrong." Chiamaka stopped by the window, staring out at the city lights below. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman with fire in her eyes and a resolve that bordered on obsession. "I'll make them pay," she vowed, her voice steady now. "I'll make them feel the pain they've caused me. Uche will come back to me, and Adaugo, she'll learn what it means to cross me." A sinister smile crept across her face as a plan began to take shape in her mind. She picked up her phone again, this time opening her contacts. Her fingers hovered over a name she hadn't dialed in years, someone who owed her a favor, someone who could help her execute her revenge. "You want to play happy couple?" she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. "Let's see how happy you are when I'm done with you." Chiamaka's revenge was just beginning, and she wouldn't stop until Uche and Adaugo felt the full force of her wrath. To be continued. Subscribe, comment, and like for part 2.